Okay, right. Okay, so we'll make a start. So thanks for joining. So this webinar, moving quickly and efficiently over to the secure private cloud. So we've gone through the obvious, the first. Everyone can hear me okay by the sounds of it. Can you see any problems with the visual? Again, if there's any problems with the presentation, just drop that into the notes. Hoping to be 20 to 30 minutes. Quite a little bit shorter than Liam's, with a bit of luck. I think Liam's might have run over slightly. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. Any questions, you can just drop some questions over to me. I will start recording this session, and we'll send the link over to everybody to recap. So I'm just going to start the recording now. Okay, so I'm Mark Connolly, work in the operations team at Techman. I'll give you a bit of an introduction on one of the later slides. Just go through the agenda. So again, as I mentioned, a quick introduction from the operations team at Techman. We'll go into why this webinar and why we're doing it and why we're running it now, and especially with the current climate of the pandemic we're in at the moment. A quick recap on the private cloud. What is the private cloud? There's a little bit of confusion between what is the public cloud and what is the private cloud. So we'll just do some clarity on that. And get ready what you need to do in preparation for moving to the private cloud. There isn't a great deal I can do in terms of a demonstration, but we'll have a quick look at one or two things on the back end of what goes on in Azure, and then of course any questions and answers. Okay, so a quick introduction. So my name's Mark. I work on the operations team at Techman. The operations team is a fairly new title. Previously the platforms team, you may have heard that. Essentially, we look after the cloud or the Azure managed service at Techman. We're responsible for all the deployments of Business Central and Nav, as well as the roll-ups, upgrades, all the integrations, and just about anything really that is involved in the platform for Nav and Business Central. Bit of a history into the sort of the cloud journey that we've been on through Techman. Just give it a context really. So we've been a hosting partner since around about 2008. We had a data center in the UK over here in the Midlands. We slowly started moving a lot of our services into Azure around about 2013-14. We became a CSP reseller, I think, in 2016, which gave us the ability to sell direct to our clients and not have to push our clients and customers through a distributor or reseller. So we became a tier one reseller for all Azure services, 365, Azure, Power BI, all those kind of things, Office 365. So why this presentation and why now? Why have I been asked to put a presentation together? So effectively, really, the current situation, the COVID-19 and the pandemic is highlighted the requirement for availability and scalability, really. So when we say availability, I'll say the first week or two of the scenario, the situation, we were pretty much inundated with clients who were on premise, who sent all their workforce home, and then had the headache or the overhead of getting all their staff working from home. All kinds of comms issues and platform issues, security, governance, auditing, that kind of thing. People needing VPN clients setting up and additional VPN licenses, so it caused a bit of a headache for a lot of our clients. So it really brought up and highlighted, if you were already in a private cloud, and a lot of those things, certainly the availability side of things, is much easier to deal with. Scalability as well is another big one. So a lot of our clients, unfortunately, have had to sort of downscale their operations, and with Azure and with the private cloud, one of the beauties of that is you can scale down your resources and therefore pay less for the service. Thankfully, a few clients of ours are doing very well, and likewise their demand has gone up, so we can actually scale those resources up accordingly as well. Microsoft say that their cloud usage has gone up by 775%, so that's quite a big demand for Azure cloud resources. I must say that isn't just Azure. I would have thought the Xbox and other streaming services take a lot of that, a big chunk of that. But clearly the Azure demand has gone up significantly. So much so that right now, actually, there's actually a freeze on any new resources in the UK unless you are a frontline or a key industry. But hopefully that's going to be lifted in the coming days and weeks. So a huge interest in platform as a service. We'll come on to the terminology of platform as a service and software as a service, and private cloud and public cloud in a slide further on. So another interesting requirement, or an interesting need for or interest in Azure is the SQL costs. I don't know if anybody's purchased or looked to purchase SQL recently. Microsoft have not long changed their licensing requirements for SQL, and it's very expensive, in short, to purchase or own SQL anymore. You can no longer have the runtime license running alongside Business Central. If you had it previously and you're upgrading, you can bring it across. But if you're looking to re-implement Business Central or buy Business Central, you can no longer have a SQL runtime license. So you need to purchase SQL if you are running it on premise. But if you're running Business Central or Nav in private, it makes it much more cost efficient to own or to run your database on an Azure SQL database. And again, there's still some confusion over the public cloud and private clouds. This is another opportunity for us to explain the differences on this presentation. So a quick slide on private cloud. What is a private cloud? So you would have heard PaaS and SaaS. PaaS being platform as a service, and SaaS being software as a service. When we talk about private cloud, that's platform as a service, and when we talk about public cloud, that's software as a service. And the difference between the two really is platform as a service. You get some resources that you can spin up in the cloud, and they're your resources, and you can run your workload on those resources. You get control, the scalability, the flexibility, whereas software as a service is a subscription model, where you just get the software and you pay for that software per user per month on a rolling basis. And another thing to highlight with PaaS is it's consumption based, so you pay for what you use. You pay for those resources, so if you scale up those resources, you pay more. If you scale down those resources, you pay less. With software as a service, it's one flat fee for per user per month, and you don't get that flexibility over scaling up and scaling down. So Business Central running on your own resources, so you're not sharing those resources with other customers, other clients. As I mentioned, you get control over your data and resources. A Business Central install on a private cloud is still deemed an on-premise install. So though it's not on your physical premise in your server room, in your data center, it's still an on-premise installation, but it's on your Azure virtual machines, your Azure resources. It's evergreen, meaning it's a bit of an IT term. What that means is the platform, that there's the hardware and the software on the background is constantly being updated and being upgraded by Microsoft and kept fresh and kept evergreen. No capex, so no big one-off payments to purchase hardware. It's all a monthly bill based on your consumption. All your backups and disaster recovery all taken care of. Again, all part of the monthly consumption costs. We've mentioned that again, so single tenancy, so it's your own Business Central deployment in your own subscription, your own private cloud. It's very much seen as a gateway to SaaS. So Microsoft Utopia and a lot of clients' Utopia is to get to SaaS, is the end goal, to get onto SaaS, to make it much easier to keep on top of all the upgrades and monthly roll-ups that Microsoft push out. So the private cloud, or PaaS, is very much seen as a gateway to SaaS. What that means is if you're on the private cloud, you've got that flexibility and scalability to upgrade quicker and easier, to go through the versions, to get all your extensions away from the old legacy CAL object modifications to extensions, and then into SaaS. So it gives you much more flexibility over your upgrades to get you to a point where you can then migrate to SaaS. And also, if your resources and data is already in Azure, the migration is much quicker, much easier to get that into SaaS. So you're not using your own bandwidth and your own comms and the internet connection to get into SaaS. You're already in Azure. You're going from a private cloud to a public cloud. So I hope that that makes sense. When we say prepare for PaaS, or what you need, what we need to do for PaaS is you need an Azure tenant. So when we talk about tenancy in Azure, again, there's quite often some confusion around tenancy. So whenever you purchase, if you're on premise now, when you purchase your first Office 365 subscription or Power BI subscription or Azure subscription, you get given an Azure tenant, and that tenant is your slice, if you like, of Microsoft's Active Directory. So you get a tenant which is unique to you, which from within that tenant you can start creating subscriptions. Now it could be an Office 365 subscription, a Power BI subscription, or an Azure subscription, but it's underneath the top of the hierarchy is a tenant. So you need an Azure tenant. Now, if you already have a 365 subscription, you will already have a tenant. So it's important that if and when you did decide to make that leap into Azure, if you don't go and create a new tenant, if you're using Techman to be your Azure reseller or any other partner to be your Azure reseller, it's important to make sure that your Azure subscription is underneath that same tenant, so your Azure partner doesn't create a new tenant and therefore give you different set of user accounts and MFA policies, that kind of thing. A very important aspect of preparing to move to the private cloud, and this goes for, even if you are moving to any hosting service or even SaaS, is some good database housekeeping. So any job queues, web services, or companies that are redundant, that no longer needed, it's a good opportunity now to delete those or to purge those. Anything that you don't need to bring over to Azure is better. More scope for failure, more scope for issues. But also, it's very important to not bring across any data that you don't need, because obviously, again, higher risk, more opportunity to go wrong, and of course, increased cost as well. The change log is again a big one. So we see a lot of clients trying to move to Azure, and with huge change logs. We see very often the change log can be equally 70% of the entire database. So it's good practice to truncate or even completely truncate the contents of the change log, or at least delete entries past 6 months if you don't need those. But if you are looking at moving, we can engage with you, and we can do a bit of database housekeeping on that. It's around about a 2 to 3 day effort really to get your current workload, Nav or Business Central workload, into Azure. What happens is we would create your tenant. If you haven't already got a tenant, we would create your subscription. We'll build your Azure resources. We would deploy Nav or Business Central in Azure, bring database across, a copy of your database across. So at this point, you're still live on premise, but we'll bring a copy of your database into Azure. And that's a 2 or 3 day effort to get to that point. Do all your testing in Azure, make sure your interfaces, integrations are working okay, again, your web services, your job queues, other clients connected and test. Once you're happy with that, then we take another database. So we switch off your on-premise, take a copy of your database and move that into Azure, and then cut over and make that live. So you can imagine you've got a big database, that time could increase massively because you're moving your database twice. So we've seen a customer recently whose database was, I think it was 410 gig. Their change log alone was 270 gig of that. So we were looking at around about a 36-hour migration of the database, and that changed to between 8 and 10 hours by purging that change log. So 2 to 3 hour effort, 2 to 3 day effort, apologies, for a typical migration from on-premise to Azure. Parallel cost is a good thing to highlight because, as I mentioned, it's a consumption-based system, Azure. So you are paying for whatever you consume, you use on a monthly basis. The minute you start your Azure resources, you have to start paying for those resources. So you want to keep the migration down to a short period of time, preferably, let's say a month. So you've got your on-premise or your current hosted solution, wherever that may be, still running. You're paying for the Azure resources, even though you're not live on those Azure resources. Then you cut over, and then you can stop or turn off any current servers that are on-premise or through your hosting partner. You can terminate those agreements. So in some cases there are parallel costs where you're paying for Azure, but you're not live in Azure yet. Okay, so I'm conscious we've been quite quick to cover those slides. Any questions up to this point? If you can put any of those in the chat window. Like I said, I have got through those slides quite quickly. And if not, we'll have a quick look at the back end. Obviously, I can't demonstrate a migration, certainly in a webinar, given the complexities involved. But I can give you a little bit of a back end insight into what it looks like in Azure and some of the monitoring that we offer in the platform as a service. Okay, so I can't see any questions, so we'll have a quick look at what we can show you. So this is the Azure portal. Many of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not. This is where we manage all of your Azure resources. So in effect, really, this is your server room or your data center or your estate, but it's virtual resources in Azure. If we filter on, oops, lost my filter for some reason. We just filter here on. We'll look at SQL Server and a virtual machine. Okay, so we'll look at your SQL Server first. and I'll show you the scalability element of it, as I mentioned earlier. So this could be your database here, your live Business Central database. This is not a live database, so there's no activity here. Unfortunately, I shouldn't really show you a live customers system. But here we'll get some insight into the activity of what's going on real time in your database. A lot of metrics in terms of query performance. So what queries are running right now, and any long running queries or high consumption or high consuming queries. Again, there's no workload, unfortunately, on this at the moment. But what I can show you is the scalability element of it. So what we here is literally a slide bar of your available resources on your database. So again, I mentioned that in the current climate we've been asked to scale down or sometimes scale up resources. This really would be the equivalent of you purchasing more disk space or more cores or more memory in your on-premise environment, whereas in Azure it literally is a sliding scale between how much resources we give your database. So we can move to a premium tier, which is much more expensive tier database, and again we can do this on the fly. So I'll stick to standard, and we can move that to an S4 database. I can hit apply, and there's no downtime for this. It's more of an admin overhead really of giving your database a bigger quota of resources. So it really is as simple as that in terms of scaling resources in Azure. If I go back on to look at some virtual machines, so I've got one virtual machine here running. Again, I can add more disks. I can resize the virtual machine, which basically gives you changing the amount of cores, the amount of memory, and the IOPS available to your VM. This does need a restart when you resize a virtual server, because that is going to be moving you onto a different host, different physical host in Microsoft data centers. So that does require a restart. In terms of the monitoring, I mentioned that there's a lot more control over monitoring of the resources. So this is Techman's managed service offering for Techman's own platform as a service, managed service. You don't have to have Techman's managed service; you can manage it yourself. But to give you a little bit of an example of the kind of ability to monitor your resources, this is Techman's monitoring system. But in here, I can go down to the database level, and I can monitor. And again, in real time, and going back, I can set my own time frame here. I can go to historic data and pick on the last 7 days, 14 days, 30 days. But it gives you a great deal of flexibility over what resource you can manage and monitor. So, for example, here I can look at the DTU. So DTU is Microsoft's almost virtual currency in terms of a database resource. It's a combination of CPU, memory, and read and write. So I can see real time what's going on in my database. I can look at the instant CPU and the IOPS, so the disk read and write. So all this is available to us in Azure, which might not be available to you as an on-premise. You may have your own on-premise monitoring tools, but that's just an example of what we can get in Azure out of the box, really, on that front. Okay, so there isn't a great deal more I can show you. Unfortunately, it's not like I can demo on a webinar moving to Azure. But hopefully, I am conscious we did breeze through the first set of slides. So any questions on those, guys? Anything that I was a bit too quick to skim over?
Mark, it's Liam here. Just a quick. Yeah. I don't know if it's completely relevant. I know Microsoft are obviously having a few constraints around what we could do with Azure when all this bubbled up 3 or 4 weeks ago. Has that eased now? Are they allowing people to spin more resources?
No, not yet. If you already got an Azure subscription, there's no problem whatsoever. They're capping new subscriptions. And they're holding those resources back for key industries. We have successfully logged a case with Microsoft and put a case forward for resources for a key industry for one of our clients, 2 of our clients who do work as a key industry. But we are told in the coming days and weeks, as the sort of crisis eases off, hopefully, they'll start to relax. The capacity is there. They're not short on capacity, but they are trying to hold some back for things like the NHS and government resources, education industry. So the resources are there. They're just being very selective as to who they give those resources to. But like I said, if there is if you are a key industry and you need some capacity right away, we can mitigate, and Microsoft, and they will give us the resources. And we have done that over the last few days.
Okay, good. Cheers, mate. Thanks for the update.
Quick question. Whereabouts geographically does the data tend to be stored? I have seen via 365 regular emails suggesting that an option comes in later this year to be able to choose that. Not that my particular company requires local placement of data, but I just wondered where it is, and is there a difference in performance if you've got everybody on the system, if it's locally or in this country compared to, say, it's somewhere internationally?
Yeah, of course. So when you create your resource, you get to choose the location where you host that resource. So in a traditional Business Central private cloud, you would have a one virtual server, or at least one virtual server, and an Azure SQL server. So when you create those resources, you can choose the location where they are stored. In the UK, there's 2 options: UK South and UK West. And I believe UK South is a data center in Eastbourne, I think, on the south coast somewhere. And I think UK West is Dublin, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Or no, Belfast, maybe Belfast, possibly. But yeah, Mark, there is a website which I can possibly find and maybe share with you, where they do give they don't give obviously towns and regions, but they give you roughly whereabouts in the country they are hosted. You get full disclosure on where you put your data. You can choose the region. And obviously,
is there a performance difference from where you have that hosted?
No, I mean, Microsoft don't share with us they put a lot of work and effort into making sure every region is as powerful as any other. You get that flexibility over the resources you give your databases or virtual servers. Clearly, there are some areas that have got more capacity. If you want to scale your database to a very, very, very high tier, you may hit a problem where the region you're in have that valuable resource. So at that point, you can then move your resource to a different region, or request to Microsoft to have that capacity increased. But there's no documented restrictions or bottlenecks or glass ceilings, if you like, on per region. Microsoft put a lot of effort into making sure all their regions have the same capacity and same same amount of resources in that region, in that data center.
Mark, is there any way you would not, talking on that point, obviously latency and all that, I know when I've spoke to you in the past, is there, if you're in like the Western Europe or the European region, you're saying there's not much impact. I know they've got a couple of UK data centers. I'm assuming though, once you go into East US or something like that, then just the logistics means that you potentially could have some issues if you're on a live production system. Yeah,
do you mean in terms of if you're splitting out your resources? So if you're putting your virtual server in one region and your database in a second region, is that what you mean? Sorry.
No, I did, and again, I'm learning as we go here, but I was under the assumption that just the logistics of obviously pushing data between us and Dublin or us and you know, Holland probably is not going to have an impact. But if all our VMs or whatever were in a US data center on Azure, I'm assuming that you're going to have a little bit more latency just because of the travel times, I think.
Yeah. So no, we put all our clients by default into a UK region, UK West or UK South. And yes, if you did have resources split across the UK, for example, and the US, yes, there is latency between the two regions, and in some cases, an obvious, noticeable amount of latency. We would always put your resources in a location where we can keep your virtual server and your database in the same cluster, in effect, to cut down on any latency issues or any throughput issues. Moving data between regions will slow things down. Moving to a different region rather, but we would make sure that all your resources are in the same region to cut out any latency issues.
Thanks.
All right. So one of the reason why we're doing this sort of webinar now is because we've been pretty much inundated over the last few weeks with requests or questions around moving workloads off premise into Azure. So just to give some examples, really. So one of the positives, the good stories to come out of having your workload in Azure, as I mentioned, is greater flexibility over spinning up additional services and servers. So if you're looking to upgrade, you can literally in minutes quite easily spin up a second or third or fourth virtual server. So you can have a dev environment, a UAT environment, a QA environment, really fairly quickly. And what we see now is obviously it's difficult to do that on premise in the current climate because obviously a lot of staff are furloughed. So getting those resources to create those resources for you on premise is quite difficult. We've got customers that are trying to buy kit in, they can't get kit in quick enough. A lot of this stuff is made in China, obviously, so getting the hardware in is proven difficult. Obviously, if you're in the private cloud, all those resources are there for you already, so you can quickly create that test environment, that second dev environment quite quickly. You're not waiting for people to get to sites with hardware. I've seen one or two instances where vendors haven't been able to honour warranty again because they can't get the spare part. So a disk is down in the SAN or a power supply is offline. People are having a hard time getting those spare parts. I'm not saying that there's going to be a pandemic again next year or the year after, but it's worth bearing in mind is if your workload is in Azure, you've got that flexibility and scalability I mentioned again to quickly create those resources and get those done quicker, and they're evergreen. So you create a new virtual server now, you get by default server 2019 If you wanted to upgrade your Business Central and the minimum spec is minimum requirements is Windows SQL Server 2016 or 19, but your on-premise license only covers you for 2008, 2012, whatever it is, that headache goes away, because as part of the consumption cost, as part of the compute costs, the Windows operating system is included. That goes for SQL as well. That goes for SQL. I mentioned the increased costs for SQL. When you spin up an Azure SQL database, you just pay for that one database for every hour it's in use. You don't have to worry about licensing it per core or the server and cal licensing model. It's purely consumption. So as long as that database is running, it's always backed up, it's always online, it's always highly available. And again, the SQL licensing cost is included in that. So we've had a number of requests over the last few weeks to, well, I need to upgrade. You know, we've seen a huge workload, increased workload. We want to upgrade now. Likewise, people have got a lot of spare capacity, so it's a good time to do the upgrade. And they can't really do that because they can't get into their data center, they can't get into their server room. In some cases, they can't get the hardware, they can't get the licenses quick enough. So the question is how quickly can we get into Azure? And that probably goes some way to explain why Microsoft has seen a 750% increase in their traffic. I mentioned as well, I'm conscious of time now, I mentioned that the utopia, if you like, of Microsoft is to get into SaaS. Again, one of the positive or good things about being in a private cloud is you can quickly get to the point, easier to get to the point where you can move to SaaS. Because again, using a scenario is you're on premise, you've got your hardware in your server room. If you need to get onto let's say Business Central 15 to move your legacy cal object modifications into extensions, you might have to then purchase SQL again to get to the required version of SQL, purchase more hardware, potentially purchase more Windows licenses to be able to get to that platform, to then move to extensions, to then move to SaaS. Again, that's taken away if you're in the private cloud, because you can spin up new databases and new virtual servers much quicker. You don't have to worry about buying in those licenses or buying in that new hardware. So again, that's another example of requests that I've seen in the last week or so, as to how quickly can we get into Azure, what does it look like, what's it going to cost us, and how long does it take. So hopefully this webinar has answered some of those questions.